You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the 95 Podcast. This is Dale Sellers, Executive Director at 95 Network, hanging out with two world changers today. Got Eric Metcalf and Jon Ferguson with me today. And I actually met them through a collaborative effort. And Eric, I don't even remember how we connected, but I'm glad we did because it's just wonderful to see your heart and your ministry's heart to work together with everyone. And we're going to dive into all that. But for just a few minutes, I want to get to know you a little bit. So how you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Jon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah.
You guys, you're you got the midst of the winter happening on you guys there, as we were saying off mic, but here in South Carolina, it's going to be a warm day today. So you guys are in the Chicagoland area. Is that correct?
I'm on the north side of Chicago. Yeah, just a little bit north of what we call the Loop, which is kind of the downtown area. So I've been here about 14 years. Yeah, love living in the city, which might be a little bit different for some of your listeners, but yeah, it's good. It's good stuff.
Cool. And Eric, where are you located?
I often refer to where I live as the boring burbs. So I used to be in the city. I've been sad ever since. So now I'm in the burbs. I've been here for 5 years, but I was in Jon's neighborhood for quite some time.
Okay.
Helped plant a church there on that side of the city. So I miss the city, but I'm in Downers Grove, Illinois.
Okay. Well, take a moment, Eric, and just kind of share with us your story a little bit. Help everybody get to know you a bit.
Short version, didn't grow up in a Christian home. My brother was dating a gal, and this is my version of the story. She said, if you want to keep making out, you need to come to church. So he became a Christ follower. And then he was the one that actually led me to Jesus and our family. And then I went into vocational ministry, did my internship with the Fergusons, been at Community Christian for over 25 years. My wife and I and 3 kids, 2 kids in college, and serve with NewThing. NewThing is our church multiplication arm of Community. And yeah, man, been with those guys for over a decade. Used to lead I'm a serial church planter, been a part of 5 different startups, and got to lead one of those projects with Jon in the city. And here I am hanging out with you guys.
First time I've ever met anyone who called himself a serial church planter. I'm like, I think that's good.
He just can't help himself.
Take a moment, Jon, and kind of share with us your story a little bit.
Yeah, right on. I don't know if I could call myself a serial church planter. I've been in the same church for 35 years. But the beautiful thing about Community, where we both serve, is we're always starting something new, and so I think it just kind of keeps us scratching that itch for new startups and kind of that entrepreneurial, I guess, adventuresome spirit that I think Eric and I both share. But yeah, I was actually born in a really small town in the middle of Missouri. My dad was a pastor there in a town that the population was 470 people.
Wow.
And the church grew there to the point where they're reaching about 175 people every week. So, by anybody's standards, having a tremendous impact on that community.
Absolutely.
So I do have memories and recollections of rural church and just the cool stuff that happened there. And, when my dad was leading that church, I was super little, but lots of great stories. But grew up in a Christ following home, moved to the Chicagoland area when I was just a little guy. And my dad was a church planter, and he was a part of the same church for 37 years. And so I've basically known 2 churches my entire life. The one my dad started that I grew up in, and the one that my brother Dave and I started with some friends when I was 23. Dave was 25. And so, there's been a lot of iterations of that over the years now. And like I said, I live on the north side of Chicago with my wife. I've got 2 adult children. They live in New York City. So Chicago wasn't, I guess, metro enough for them.
Wow.
They needed to go to New York. So figure that one out. But I spend my time between Community as founding pastor and have responsibilities there. and a NewThing, where I'm the lead visionary for North America. Eric and I also work together on the Chicagoland movement. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of what I'm up to. My kids are 28 and 25. My wife is an educational consultant and does work throughout the city and the suburbs.
Cool. So both of you mentioned something called NewThing. John, tell us what this is.
Yeah. NewThing. This NewThing started a number of years into the life of Community Christian Church, and we had a kind of a threefold vision for the church. We wanted to be an impact church, which meant we wanted to be the kind of church that would reach people who are far from God. Weren't interested in kind of rearranging the furniture of the kingdom, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then we also wanted to be the kind of church that if we suddenly disappeared, that the folks in the community would miss us, and not just the ones that show up on Sunday. I think you understand what that means. We wanted to have an impact in the local community. Second phase of that vision was we wanted to be a reproducing church. And so we didn't want to just be one church in one location. We wanted to, start new locations, start new churches. And then the third phase of that vision would be, if God would so bless us, we'd like to be a catalyst for a movement. Now, I don't know if we really understood or knew what we were talking about with that third phase. I mean, there was 5 of us at the time sitting in a hen house restaurant in the middle of Illinois. Some people would say, hey, you boys might want to try starting a small group before you start a movement. But we had a big vision, and the church got started, and it grew, and God was so good to us. And then a number of years into the start of the church, I think it was about 9 years into it, one of the guys on our staff, our student ministry director, came to Dave and myself and said, hey, I feel like God's calling me to plant a church in Denver. And we like to joke that few people ever come to you and say, I want to plant a church in Cleveland or
That's right, man.
Or Pittsburgh. It's usually Denver or San Diego, right?
Or God's calling me to Honolulu.
Now that would be a good opportunity. I'd take that one. But he felt like God was calling him to Denver. We tried to, kind of change his mind because we loved what he was doing here. That was just our initial honest gut response. It was like, well, you've done a great job as our student ministry director. You should stay here. But it was clear that God was up to something. And truthfully, we found that, when somebody on your staff comes to you and God's given them a vision like that, they've already got one foot out the door. They just decided to finally tell you about it.
Yeah.
And so, you can try to get them to stay, which doesn't work. You can kick them to the curb and say, good luck.
Which you shouldn't do.
Of course not. Right.
Churches do, though. That's why I mentioned that.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Or you can get behind it and act like it was your idea in the first place.
Smart.
So, I mean, that's kind of what we did. And that initially, that church plant, it was amazing what God did there, because about 35 people actually sold their homes, changed schools, switched jobs, moved from Chicago to Denver to be a part of that church plant. And that gave birth really to NewThing. That was our first church plant. And then since then, it's grown to become really a global networks that are all over North America and the world, really. And so right now we just we say we want to catalyze reproducing leaders, churches, networks, and movements, and I feel like that's kind of what God's calling us to do.
Well, it's great so far being part of it. Eric, you kind of you've been heading up the parts that I've been involved in. What's your ultimate vision behind just this collaborative thing we've been doing?
Yeah, thanks, man. Good question. I think, we're really hoping to lean into John 17 as an organization, not just helping churches collaborate together, but also try to increase organizations, and denominations to collaborate together. And if NewThing could, we'd like to set a table for that. So what we've been trying to do is create roundtables, is what we call them. We have a couple of these that meet monthly. Mm-hmm. One is for movement leaders. These are leaders who are leading likely in local cities. Sometimes it's an affinity-based movement, like a Latino movement. And these leaders are convening churches to plant churches together. So we host that monthly, and we call that a movement leader roundtable. Mm-hmm. And then we also do one for affinities, like rural churches, which is how we kind of kicked off this beta test of a rural church movement leader roundtable. And so far it's been great, man. Thanks for being a part of that. It's been awesome being able to, and honestly, we're just trying to serve. We're trying to create space for these leaders to communicate with one another, to potentially collaborate on new initiatives together. see where God's at work, try to join him in that stream from a NewThing perspective. And, we feel called everywhere to all people. So like we're looking to serve in every aspect of North America, and knowing that there's 60 plus million people who live in rural America. And, I think, what is it, 80 to 85% of churches are less, or 200 or less, or you would know those stats better than I would, Dale. What's the statistic?
95%.
Okay.
95
Which is why
network.
There's this thing called the 95 Network. Maybe
I saw that on your website, Dale.
That's what it was.
Well, just to be clear now, the website says 95% of American churches have less than 500 attendees, right?
Yes, those statistics were when I wrote my book back in 2000, and those were the most current statistics then. But that's all been blown out of the water since COVID. Because so you can reduce all the statistics that we've been normally say. We normally say there's 95% of all churches are less than 500, 87% are less than 200, and then 75% of all churches have less than 100 people. And this is attending. But those were pre-COVID numbers. Reduce all that by 30% and it'd be more accurate.
Wow.
That's more accurate. So anyway, back to you, Eric. Sorry about that.
No worries. John 17 inspired us. It's led us to lean in lots of different areas. So one way is creating roundtables. Another way is creating partners or strategic partners. And these are organizations that believe in what NewThing is doing, and they offer a unique resource to serve these leaders. And then the other piece to us is what we call the NewThing Alliance. And this is finding like-minded organizations that we can collaborate together for the greater good of the kingdom. So these partnerships really has helped us kind of enter into a lot of different relationships, and that includes the Rural Movements Roundtable. But Dale, is that answering your question? Am I leaning in the right place?
You did a great job. And I want to ask you this question. As you dove into it, what was your expectations?
I would hope. I mean, one of the things that we'd kind of sensed, you mentioned the pandemic. Since the pandemic, there seemed to be more of an openness to collaboration, almost like leaders in North America. They weren't prepared for this pandemic. Not that anybody was, but our global friends, we would often say, kind of like tongue in cheek, like they're pandemic proof. They've already lived through pandemics, our global friends, and they understood that when the pandemic happened, they just kept running the play and the way they see the kingdom and following Jesus. Whereas our friends in North America, we all kind of got stuck. And so there was this kind of desperation that led to an openness of collaboration. And so NewThing really, we just did our best to try to take advantage of that opportunity and create space for leaders to work together. We were already doing that through local networks, as John talked about earlier, helping get churches to work together, to plant churches together. And we have, I forget our most recent statistic, but over 1,000 networks around the world of churches working together. And so we thought we would just try to lean into that and trust that God was with us in that. And so far, there's been a huge openness to orgs and churches and leaders working together. So it's been good.
It's really cool. John, I'm 62. I don't know how old you are, but in my lifetime, and I grew up here in the South in a typical Baptist church, the inability of churches to work together is what I remember. Basically, if you were Baptist, you didn't work with the Methodists. If you were Methodist, you didn't work with the Presbyterians. In what you guys are doing now, have you seen a shift in that, or even did you experience that even as you were, because you've been doing ministry for a long time?
Yeah, and I'm catching up to you quick, Dale. So I'm not far behind you, just a few years.
Well, really, I don't want you to catch me for a while.
I've only got a few more months in my 50s. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
But I think we've seen a change. And I think Eric would probably back me up on this. And I think even maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was less appetite for collaboration, I think, than what we've seen now. And we like to use the term friends on mission. And that's really what we want to be about. And certainly there's things that, we can disagree on. We're not going to agree on every point of theology necessarily. We sometimes like to say that, we hope our focus on Christology will overcome some of the gaps in our theology.
Yep.
Let's focus on Jesus. Let's focus on the mission together. And I think we can do a lot of damage together for the kingdom. We also use that phrase, kingdom over castle. And I think that's something that more and more, I think pastors have an appetite for. They just recognize we're not getting it done. I mean, you mentioned the devastating impact that, COVID had on so many churches. I know that was, both in the city, the suburbs, and in rural communities.
Everywhere.
I feel like in Chicago, even in the city here, more than ever before, I feel like we're seeing that churches have an appetite to come together. Let's do this together because we're not getting it done on our own, and forming these small networks where people actually get to know each other, break down some of the barriers and discover that, we may not have the same denominational name. We may have some differences, but some of the things that we're facing are very much the same. And we can definitely be better together and advance the kingdom cause much faster than if we're out there doing it on our own. I mean, you've seen, some of the statistics Carrie Newhoff recently talked about how church closures are outpacing church plants by 3 to 1. I mean, that's incredible. He estimates that there's somewhere between 4 and 10,000 churches closing every year. Now, that's a massive gap between 4 and 10,000. It's hard to know where that lands for sure. But I think at the end of the day, if anybody thinks they're getting it done on their own, they're kidding themselves. And so we really need to come together. And as Eric said, I mean, that was the vision of Jesus, John 17. We like to call it the great collaboration, right? We know the Great Commission, we know the Great Commandment, but let's not forget the Great Collaboration and how we can come together to do more and better when we're together than we are on our own.
Eric, what have you seen in I would say, the health or psyche of pastors since the pandemic? And what I'm talking about is, we do multiple conferences at 95 Network, and we mostly still help around mission, vision, helping smaller churches learn how to do strategic thinking, which, by the way, we say in the Greek is the word plan, because when you start talking about trying to talk about strategy they get like, hey, you're trying to be secular. So we just said, let's get a plan. But what we began to happen, it happened after I guess we began to meet in person some. Pastors wouldn't come to the conference because they made this statement. They said, I don't want to learn about mission and vision right now. I'm just trying to get through the day. And so that's how we developed the Soul Care Essentials conference that we do. In this time from, I guess we're recording this 2025, early in 2025. What have you seen as far as just overall health? Or is it regional? Is it everybody kind of the same boat? What's your overview?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a leader on our team who has a strong sensitivity towards the spiritual health and the emotional health and how leaders are feeling. And he errs on the side of being very pastoral. So it's beneficial to have his perspective on things. I think he would say that, leaders have gotten good at one of two things. It's either being really transparent or just continuing to prove and fake that they're doing okay, but they're not going to really tell anybody they're not doing okay.
Yep.
That's what the pandemic probably did. But I would say that what's helped is having these leaders be in networks and be in community with other leaders to at least give them space for when they are struggling, when they are having a challenging time with their own soul care, that they're able to talk about that with some friends on mission, using the phrase that John talked about earlier. And just as we get, think of a network like a small group, essentially. This is a small group for pastors to be able to be encouraged, to be inspired, to have a place of confession, a safe place to explore their own kind of spiritual journey, their own faith journey, what they're struggling with. And I would say just overall, there are different kinds of leaders that get attracted to a network, but
Sure.
Most of them that are coming are hoping that there are other like-minded leaders like them who are thinking about church multiplication, who are thinking about kingdom over castle, which is another phrase that we often use within NewThing. And they're looking for leaders who are like them. And in that space, they can find hope and they can find purpose and kind of imagination beyond their local church, which I'm guessing is probably the case with a lot of rural leaders. They're finding themselves kind of isolated or alone. And so how do they find a space where they can be encouraged and look beyond just Sunday or whatever responsibilities come with being a pastor within their church? And networks can help do that. So yeah, I think we're not out of the woods yet in terms of how people feel and kind of where they're at emotionally. But I do believe that the pandemic helped leaders become more aware of their feelings and more aware of where they're currently at, and even more of a willingness to talk about it. Because I think there was probably a lot of barriers to that in leaders' heads about whether they should share where they're currently at.
It became okay to get counseling.
Yeah.
It became okay to say,
That's
hey,
right.
I'm not doing well for the first time in my lifetime. Anyway, I want to ask both of you this
Yes.
question. I'll start with you, Eric, and then John, I'll ask you the same question. How do you keep your soul healthy, Eric? What do you have a process of how do you do?
Yeah, I would say it's about hitting the right pause button at the right time is part of it. I think an old phrase that's been around for a while is it's just a job. It's really important.
Mhm.
I love ministry. I love working with the church. I love working with leaders like you, Dale, and serving in any way I can. But at the end of the day, it's just a job. So, like, how do I put a pause on that when I need
Mhm.
to put a pause on it emotionally and mentally, and to have good boundaries? And so I think, that's one discipline. I would also say having some form of spiritual rhythms. I'm connected to Community Christian Church. I serve as a part of the church. I'm on the parking team. My wife is a worship leader at this church.
Mhm.
And we also are in a small group that we go to, that we connect with, and that we have friends on mission locally with our friends here in our neighborhood. And so all those things kind of keep us in our faith journeys growing on a regular basis. And then my own personal spiritual disciplines that go with that. I mean, we want to continue to be a generous family. And so we do our best to do that as Christ followers as we invest in the local church. But man, we have a long ways to go. We're always trying to figure that out. I'm always trying to figure that out.
Mhm.
And then, of course, having relationships like we do within our team, me being connected to John and Patrick, who's our global director, and having those kind of relational rhythms that keep us all talking about our faith journeys and how we're doing spiritually. So, good
That's
question.
cool. John, you unmute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, good question, Dale. Well, one of the tools that we encourage our pastors in our networks to use, and that I actually use personally too, is something we call RPMs. And it's a bit of a acronym for relational, physical, mental, spiritual. It's based on Luke 52:52, where Jesus said that he grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. And so he grew, relationally in favor with man. He grew physically in stature. He grew mentally in wisdom, and he grew spiritually in favor with God. So it's just kind of a nice template, and I find it as a helpful assessment tool. And fairly regularly, almost every day, I'll say, okay, well, how am I doing in each one of those areas? Is the trajectory good? Relationally, and when I think relationally, how am I doing with my wife, my kids, my friendships? Physically, am I taking care of myself? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating well? Am I exercising? Mentally, am I, avoiding things that aren't helpful for my emotional mental health? Am I
Mhm.
reading things that are helpful? And then spiritually, am I spending, time alone with God? Am I taking advantage of some of the disciplines that Eric mentioned, like being in community with others and spending time regularly with the Lord in quietness and in prayer? And I'm fairly disciplined about most of those things, but like most guys
I
too,
like that. I like to be honest there. I'm
right?
fairly
Most like most guys, I think, I go have streaks where I'm not doing so well. But I just full disclosure, yeah, prior to COVID, I think it was, I mean, COVID hit like spring of 2020, but
Mhm.
coming into that season, even before COVID really hit, man, I hit one of the most challenging kind of spots in my own life personally. And Dale, being about the same age, and we got a few years on Eric. It was one of the most challenging, like emotionally mental phases of my life. I, always, loved kind of like leadership, hard charging,
Mhm.
take the next hill, loved leading meetings, loved casting vision. And then all of a sudden it was like everything was super hard, like stuff
Mm.
that I typically just came easy, came natural, um, just felt like work. I often have described it this way. It was like, I could almost any time kind of kick it into fifth gear, the old
Mhm.
stick shift. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden, it was like I was grinding every time. I just couldn't find fifth gear, or like a sports metaphor. If you're down, 3-1, the bases are loaded, and the coach is looking at the dugout. Who does he want to go up to bat? I'm like, yeah, pick me.
Mm.
And then, and I've got to it's that season where it's like I'm like trying to hide, don't pick me anymore. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Interesting.
So anyway, long and short of it was, yeah, I had to take a step back, and it did cause me, I think, to recommit to some of these things that we know are good for us, but we've got to stick with. And people like Pete Scazzero, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, was super helpful. A really good book, Wayne Cordero, Leading on Empty. I felt like he was just like reading my soul when I
Mhm.
read that book, and doing things like the just having a regular rhythm. What does Pete call it? Like your I forget the exact name right now, but it's those things that I think most of us know we need. We just need accountability, and hopefully you don't need to hit a wall in order to reestablish those in a real consistent way.
I want to take a short break. We're going to pause, and then we're going to come right back because I want to ask you a follow-up question to that. So short break, be right back with Eric and Jon. Back here with Eric and Jon, and we're talking about this thing of hitting a wall and that kind of thing. I had quadruple bypass surgery at 53 years old. I had a widowmaker and did not know it. I was 100% blocked in one artery and 90% blocked in three. I asked my surgeon, I said, how did this happen to me? There's no heart disease in our family. I'm not overweight. I never smoked except for 6 months in high school, but I didn't inhale because I didn't know people did that. But, and so, I'm like, why don't you put smoke in your lungs? That's terrible. But anyway, he said it was created by hypertension and high blood pressure because of my vocation. And in my book Stalled, Hope and Help for Pastors Who Thought They'd Be There by Now, I just talk about the fact that I never could be satisfied that I was accomplishing what I was supposed to accomplish. I always felt like Jesus was mad at me because I didn't build a mega church because I came from that era, Yep. But here's the reason. The one reason I want to go here with you guys, and Eric, I'm going to come to you with the same thing. When we do our Soul Care Essentials Conference, the number one place we get pushback is when we tell pastors that God expects them to take a day off. They look at me like I'm speaking Chinese or a foreign language they do not understand. When I say, hey, God expects you to Sabbath, to take a day off, and it can't be your work day. Jon, how do you do with Sabbath?
We're really getting personal now, aren't we?
Well, I mean, this is a real podcast.
Yeah, no, I would say overall I do pretty good with it, and
well, let me ask you this: is it important to you?
Yeah. It is important to me. It's on my calendar, and I would say more often than not, I do take a Sabbath, and I've increasingly recognized the absolute need for that.
Okay.
I mean, God took a Sabbath, right? So who are we to think that we don't need one? But I think the hard part is what really is a Sabbath. And I think we can kind of kid ourselves into thinking what we're doing is a Sabbath, but are you really shutting down for 24 hours? Are you really like focusing on your relationship with Christ and your relationship with people during those moments? Or are you kind of cheating? You're looking at your phone, you're checking your messages, you're still responding to some emails. And so that's when you say, how well do I take a real Sabbath? Sometimes I do really well, and other times I don't. I would say this, I personally, I'm good at like vacations. Like I can check out, and when I leave like the area, I don't work. I can check out really well. The hard part for me is Sabbaths and taking time off when I'm still in my context.
Sure.
And so I find that I've got to take vacations. And that's not to say I don't still Sabbath.
Sure.
But those vacations from time to time really do help me recharge. And because I am, for whatever reason, able to really break away.
What did you, Eric?
Ditto. Next question.
No, we're not going to do that.
I would say I kind of meant what I said. Actually, it's very similar to what Jon just shared.
Yeah.
I think there's this there's a challenge when you're here, when you're on site, when you're in the thick of things, to really withdraw and really do the 24-hour Sabbath thing. I'm probably better at taking Sabbath throughout the week in different ways, and engaging that way, which is, some would say, is not what a Sabbath is, depending upon your theological convictions around that and the teaching of Sabbath. But when I'm away. Like, there's nobody going to bother me about anything. So that helps to have those types of rhythms. But I could definitely improve in that area. Why not? But I also, still try to live by the practice of it's just a job. So I try to cut things off too.
Sure, that's good.
And if I could just add into that real quick, I do think, and I am encouraged that I feel like the trajectory and the expectations for that are changing. And I think people recognizing, and it's probably more, our generation, Dale, and prior to us, like go, Sabbath, what Sabbath, right? I think we've reaped what we've sown and saw, hey, it's not healthy. And that's why we've got pastors burning out, marriages are failing, and all kinds of bad stuff's happening. And so I feel like there is a different expectation and accountability now that's healthy, that says, no, Sabbath is an expectation. And I feel like that's something we've tried to adopt more at Community, and at NewThing. And I hope we're moving in a good direction.
Well, the part of the reason I want to go down this road is because so many small church pastors that they can't even come to our conference or they can't even jump on Eric's call because they're so
Mm,
busy. They're just so busy. And my question always is doing what?
Mm.
If you're that busy, and the underlying thing is this. I think God gave us two things in the New Testament that really help us depend on Him. One is tithing. It makes no sense to give away your money. Doesn't make any sense to give away your money. And the other one is taking a day off. It doesn't make any sense when you're driven, and all three guys on this call are driven. We want to get it done. We got the way we go about it. But when you take that day off and you rest in Him and you trust, and you have to trust Him because it doesn't make sense to give up a day. And so that's kind of why I wanted to go there. I know you focus a lot on rural pastors, and either they don't take that day off because of themselves, but also, and Eric, I want you to speak to this. What do you do if you're in a setting where the people at the church, their expectations are that you're on call 24/7 every day of the week? How do you handle that?
that's a good question. And that's difficult to answer. I would say some of this has to do with how you talk about health and what is health, and how does somebody take care of themselves in any context, whether it's a local church or whether it's working a local business or whether it's whatever your job is, right? So like you got to have space to take care of yourself and to focus on your own development. And so in a local church setting, man, it's probably talking to that elder board and it's talking to that volunteer staff team and saying, hey, I need to make sure I'm healthy and I want you to be able to do the same. And so here's how we're going to do this. You're going to be intentional about it. I'm going to be intentional about it. And John talked about the value of RPMs, which I think is a super helpful grid. How am I doing relationally? How am I doing physically? How am I doing mentally? How am I doing spiritually? And then I want you to ask those questions of yourself as well. So kind of creating this mutual accountability can help raise where all boats rise. Would be one way to kind of address that, maybe in a local church setting.
I'm thinking as we're just talking, one of the great aspects I think you guys have to offer with your networkings is that you can provide a place to where these guys have a place to go and talk to somebody. Because John, if you're in your local church or you're in a denomination and they're not wired to think about it, and you mentioned this, in our time you didn't talk about how you felt emotionally. You didn't deal with health. You didn't deal with stuff. I remember, I think I was in the 7th grade or 8th grade when we had a guest evangelist who got up in the pulpit and made this statement. He said, "It's God first, then your ministry, and then your family." And I remember thinking, that don't sound right. Shouldn't
No
you
kidding.
putting your family above that? But that was the mentality. You wear yourself out for Jesus. I mean, have you seen that too, John?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, like I said, I think that was part of the previous kind of generation mindset. That's just the expectation. That's the way it was done. I remember, you know, my dad saying there was at one point in his ministry, I think, where he was out 40 nights in a row.
Wow.
Now, I will say this to his credit. Even when he was out in the evenings, he would always be home for dinner,
Mhm.
and would arrive early and with his tie on, and oftentimes still his dress shoes, would play basketball in the driveway with me and my brother Dave.
That's cool.
So,
That's cool.
I mean, yeah. So I never felt neglected, but he would say that was completely unhealthy, and he too, had kind of a point where he had to like just okay, this is not working.
Mhm.
But he was, it wasn't a rural church plant at that point, but he was the single pastor in a small to mid-sized church, and then that was really what prompted the elders to hire an associate pastor to work alongside him. Yeah, I mean, I think again, one of the most alarming stats that I heard recently, and this was from one of the Carey Nieuwhof's most recent research's findings, was this. Maybe you saw this too, Dale. 18%, I think he said, 18% of pastors, I think it was within the last year, have considered either self-harm or suicide.
Mhm.
That's 1 out of 5. I'm like, if that doesn't wake you up and say, okay, something's got to change, I don't know what will. And,
Wow.
and getting back to networks, I think we lead with apostolic, and that, we're kind of like, let's get out there, let's reach more people, let's start more churches. Networks do that. Networks are the backbone of movement. What I think we really are finding, though, is networks are also a vital, safe place for pastors to experience community.
I would agree. I would agree. Eric, you want to dive into that a little bit? Have you seen that as
Yeah,
well?
I mean, I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're becoming friends on mission, mission not only moves at the speed of trust, so does health. So it's like you trust each other, your health goes up because you're able to talk more transparently about how you're doing in all those areas we talked about earlier. And there's just not a lot of places for that. So networks do create space for that. There's no doubt.
I mentioned on one of our recent podcasts a story, and I haven't shared it many times on our podcast, but I was when I was pastoring the small church I was at a place where we were just on the brink of what turned into a huge church split. So all the pressure was getting to me, and it's probably what created my heart situation. But I had a board member who was a friend. We fished together, we hunted together, so we were not just church board member. We actually hung out together. And I took him to lunch one day, and I just said, "Hey, man, I need to talk to you about some things that's going on in my life. I haven't had a moral failure, but I'm just feeling a little bit overwhelmed, and I need to talk to somebody." And as I'm talking, guys, he put his hand up in my face across the table and said, "Stop, Pastor." He says, "I can't hear this." He says, "My life is a disaster, and I need your life to be perfect, so I don't want to know." And so I determined then, as a young pastor, well, I guess you're supposed to keep this stuff on the inside. And like I said, split and all the other stuff that happened. And then I actually walked away from ministry, or stepped away from ministry for 5 years. I served, volunteered at a church, but I didn't do it because I had to get as you would say, Eric, I had to get my head screwed back on because I did always purpose to put family first. Have you guys seen any stories of folks like that where they got to the brink, but then they bounced back? Eric, you got anything that comes to mind when you think about that, where someone they went to where, hey, I'm just about to lose it, but they got it back together?
Yeah, sure, of course. You have leaders all the time who are connected in a network that are going through a crisis or challenged, and they're able then to talk about that with their friends and work through that. I can't think of a particular story. That's what I'm trying to do right now, but I can say no, that's okay. But I can't think of like leaders that are like that. I'm just trying to think of a specific one. Sounds like, John, you might have an idea.
Well, and it's not like we're close friends. I know him somewhat, but I mentioned Pete Scazzero, earlier, who's author of Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, Emotionally Healthy Relationships, and Emotionally Healthy Everything Else. I think his story is powerful because he's very transparent about the fact that he was a church planter, and he's a guy's guy, right? Pete Scazzero from Queens, and so. But it was a hard driving, hard charging church planter who's getting all kinds of recognition. Church was growing like crazy. And then he got the wake up call when his wife said, "You know what? I don't like this church and I don't really like you. And if something doesn't change, I'm out of here." It's like, oh, okay. That's a bit of a wake up call.
Yeah, that'll get your attention.
And his story is that, he was not a touchy feely guy at all, but recognized that if he was going to continue, he had to change, and made massive change. And of course, we're all now the benefit both of his crisis and of his change. And so I think that's one story that I kind of look at and say, you know what, you can get to the brink of absolute disaster and still turn it around, and just appreciate how transparent he and his wife are about their story.
Eric, if you were sitting talking to someone today and they were like, "Okay, y'all are talking about me. I'm jammed up. I'm in emotional prison. I don't know what to do." What would be some good steps you would tell them as far as what to get healthy?
Yeah, I think probably the first step is to, I don't know, man. Like, you got to be willing to talk about this stuff. You got to be willing to get transparent about it, whether it's with a friend, whether it's with a coworker, whether it's with a peer, whether it's with your spouse, if you're married. You got to be willing to talk about where you're at, and take the first step to do that. Obviously confession to Jesus. He already knows where you're at, but talk about that too in your own personal reflection time and journaling and prayer. But in addition to that, I think getting into some healthy rhythms with somebody. I think, we isolate. We're really good at it. We're used to ghosting. I think the pandemic spiraled that even further. And we're kind of used to having these fabricated relationships through media. And I think we just need to take a step back and go, who am I really hanging out with? Who are my people that I'm sharing life with? I'm hanging out with a pastor tonight, and I'm doing that because it gives me life. It gives me a place to talk about how I'm doing and where I'm at. And I think finding somebody that you're having consistent relational rhythms with, I think, is really important.
Cool. John, you said you got to a place where you kind of hit the wall. How did you come back out of that? I mean, you mentioned that you got out of it. Obviously, you're sitting here, but how did you turn the ship around?
Well, one of the first things I did was I called my brother and I said, I don't know what's going on, but like something's messed up. I've never felt this way before, but I think I just need to do something pretty significant. He goes,
Were you burned
"Stop."
out? Were you burned out?
Yeah, it was burnout. Yeah, I really think it was. If I've read enough, I think, and people have different definitions of that, but I think that's what it was.
Hmm.
And he just says, well, just stop what you're doing. I'm like, okay, well, it's not always that easy, but I did. I stopped. I pretty much just stopped for a good 4 to 6 weeks.
Hmm.
That was part of it. Started reading stuff, like I said earlier, from Pete and Wayne Cordero and others. And then I started going to therapy. So I sought out help from a counselor and was doing that for probably a year. And that was really helpful too. I think I was pretty honest with Eric and some of my other mates too, and just said, "Yeah, it's a weird season. Sorry." And these guys were awesome. They covered, and you also kind of realize, oh well, you're not as indispensable as maybe you think you are. Maybe you need to start living more like that, not wait till you burn out. So who else I thought of too, Eric, was Daniel Yang.
I know Daniel.
sure,
I
yeah.
had him on the podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, have you? And Daniel's story
we're hard buddies.
yours.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
right
hard
on.
buddies.
Yeah, and he'll be the first to tell you, man, he was just going too hard, too fast, and almost took his life. And he made some necessary changes. So yeah, you hope let fewer guys have to hit a wall, hit burnout, or go through what you or Daniel went through, Dale, and we could set a culture where that's not, working at that pace is not sustainable and it's not acceptable. It's not okay. It's not godly.
You mentioned counseling, and that's really the thing that's changed my life. Is 10 years ago, I began to just kind of connect with a counselor who just helped me recognize a lot of things about myself. Things where it's hard to do ministry when you think Jesus is mad at you. Okay, it's just hard when you feel like he's disappointed. It's like you go to pray and you go, oh, it's you again, and all that was in my head, but. I grew up Baptist, and we teach, you're saved by faith and through grace, and it's free gift, free gift, free gift. But then you spend the rest of your life proving how saved you are by what you do. And because I'm a builder, I built houses and things like that growing up. I'm very performance oriented, and I recognize that about myself. And so I had an opportunity to have Kerry on our 100th podcast, and he just released At Your Best, and he talked about in there that if you look, he said, Dale, look at your calendar. He said, if you look at your calendar. And 6 months from now, your calendar is wide open. He said, and I go, oh, that's great. He goes, no, that's terrible. I go, wait a minute, Kerry. He turned it on my head. He said, if you don't build in your calendar, your block off time, your study time, your podcast time, your writing, if you don't put that in, then your calendar will fill itself up. And so I think that's changed my life a lot because I've literally gone and blocked every morning of every week from Monday through Friday from 9 in the morning till noon. You can't get in that space unless I let you in there. And that helped me a lot. Do you guys have a calendar rhythm, or how do you go about it, Eric, as far as keeping your calendar balanced?
Yeah, I am a little obsessive about my calendar, no doubt. Like I pay attention to it all the time, kind of where my commitments lie. About every 90 days, 180 days, I'll reevaluate my relational rhythms with either teammates or with my direct reports, and then any additional relationships that I have. So kind of helps me stay in check with how I'm doing relationally with people, and how I'm doing with spaces where I can talk about where I'm at and how I'm doing. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what my rhythms are.
John, what about you?
Yeah, I think I have an early morning schedule that's pretty fixed that I really try not to mess with. I think the hard part for me is turning it off at the end of the day. That my goal is like 4:30, and that can easily slip to 5:30, and the next thing I know it's 6 o'clock. So that's probably my biggest challenge.
And you're still turning it off.
Yeah, exactly. Fridays, on my calendar says Sabbath, so that's reserved for that. And then date night is something that I try to be pretty consistent with my wife as well. And so we kind of have a night that we know, okay, this is the time. What are we going to do tonight? So yeah, there are some of those rhythms. I like what you're suggesting though. Looking, there's other areas like the writing and reading and you need that time to be creative and be able to think about the future. And so blocking that off well in advance, I think, is super smart.
Well, Kerry, he has all the colors, red and yellow, green, that whole kind of thing. And I don't, mine are it's just blocked off. Because I'm obviously I'm not smart as Kerry. So let me ask you this, Eric, what do you do for fun?
Yeah, less colors is better. I understand your point. Like I need my devices and everything I'm looking at to be simple.
Yes,
Otherwise, it's like
yes.
I don't. What the heck am I looking at?
Yeah, I'm not as smart as Carrie. So.
Uh, for fun, I like to work out. Is one of the things I like to do. It's good for my head, like just to be able to
Yeah.
work out. And so I try to have a pretty decent routine around that. It's one
Mhm.
of the reasons why I dislike winter so much because I like to work out outside,
Yep.
and it's hard to do this time of year. But working out, I would say I also enjoy a good movie or a good TV series. I'm
Mhm.
definitely of the streaming generation, so like access to all that stuff is super cool and super helpful. And then I also like to play video games, and I'm also from the video game generation as a true Gen Xer. So I appreciate Nintendo Switch and a little Zelda. It's always a good experience for
See,
me.
when you
So,
guys start humming that stuff, it's like you're speaking a foreign language to me. I don't know what any of that stuff is, but I'm so glad you have that for
well,
an
I'm
outlet.
just old enough where I grew up with the Atari as well. So
Yeah.
maybe you're familiar with Atari. How about that?
Yeah, well, I grew up I grew up building houses with my dad, so I didn't get to do any of that stuff. I was outside working.
Oh man, come on.
I'm just
That's
telling
not
you.
right.
I know it is.
That's not
John,
right.
John, what do you do for fun?
I'm a little bit like Eric. I like to run. I live within just blocks of the lakefront here in Chicago. There's a great running path, and so and I have a Peloton bike too that I bought during COVID, like so many people did.
Yeah.
And both of those have been helpful, and I actually enjoy it, and it's fun. I find though that it's interesting. Running for me is not only physical exercise; it is a mental exercise,
Hmm.
and to get outside and be out in nature like that is just I find that to be very life-giving.
Yeah.
Also, living where we live, there's so many just fun ways to take advantage of what the city has to offer. So my wife and I, we love to go for walks and, you know, tons of great restaurants, museums, lots of activities of that nature. So we're super fortunate to live where we live and have access to those kind of things. So
You guys are just energizing, both of you together. And it's kind of hard to do a podcast with two people on it because, you're bouncing stuff and back and forth, but they have so much energy. I want you to kind of channel that energy into this last question as we move toward the end of the podcast. And I'll start with you, John, and then I'll go to Eric. What gives you hope for the church in the future and specifically in America right now?
yeah, great question, Dale. I think what gives me hope is something we touched on earlier, and I think it is this. What we're seeing is a much more of a kingdom over castle mindset, and
Okay.
I really believe that barriers are being broken, and people are willing to cross cultural, denominational, even some theological lines they weren't willing to before. Doesn't mean we don't keep Christ at the center. Doesn't mean we don't have an orthodox view of Scripture. It just means that we're recognizing that there are some things that maybe we've battled over that we don't need to battle over anymore. And so I'm hopeful. I think the younger generation needs that. They're looking for that.
Hmm.
And I think we can focus on the Great Commission, the Great Commandment, and the Great Collaboration. I think that's going to be a tremendous testimony for the next generation. So I'm optimistic. I'm super excited and look forward to giving another good 20, 25 years to pursuing that cause.
Oh, I like that. What about you, Eric? What gives you hope for the future of the church, America specifically?
I think maybe just that there seems to be an early movement of new models and methods that are developing across the United States, across North America, in Western Europe as well, and in Oceania, some of our more Western world mindsets. That's beyond Sunday, that looks more like life on life, micro church models, migrant church models, multi-ethnic models that I think is really attractive to this next generation. As John talks about the next generation, we just need to keep having more imagination around that. And there seems to be more and more of those types of models being developed, which I think is mission critical. And that gives me hope. It gives me hope for what could be next, and in terms of reaching this next generation specifically.
Well, I want to thank both of you for doing what you do because you don't have to. You got plenty on your plate, and you use your influence and the opportunities to actually help pull us all together. Eric, thank you for what you're doing with our monthly meeting with just getting us together.
Yeah.
And you know how hard that is, and we're all so busy, but it is exciting to see that people are prioritizing working together. I think for the first time I've ever seen it, in my lifetime. And so I want to close with this. I'll ask both of you this question and we'll wrap up. So John, you're sitting with somebody today and he's pastoring a small church and he's discouraged. And he just needs some wisdom. What would you tell him?
Mm. Wow, good question. This is going to sound like a broken record. I would probably just say, hey, don't do it alone.
Hmm.
Look for some comrades, some partners, man, that you can get together with and swap stories, and really bear each other's burdens. I think we like Eric said earlier, we're kind of lone rangers and we tend to isolate. I do. I mean, when things are going bad, my tendency is to isolate, and I know that goes against what's in my best interest. So I just encourage a struggling pastor like that. Don't do it on your own.
Eric, what'd you tell him?
Similar. I'd say get an apprentice. I think
That's
one of the
cool.
best things I ever did when
Good.
Community Christian Church came around in my life was get an apprentice. And another way to say that is get somebody to disciple. And when you start having that life on life, you're sharing life together. It's just way more fun. And the stories you get to tell and the outcomes of that spiritual journey together can just be a really fun thing to be a part of. And it can be an encouragement for what you're doing when Sunday doesn't feel right, or when the hospital visit isn't great, or when, the budget isn't being met. You can say, well, I'm at least pouring into one person, and I can see their life being changed, and it's fun to be a part of something like that. So that's what I would say.
I have asked that question dozens of times, and you're the first person who's ever gave that answer, and I think it's awesome. I
Hey, let's
just,
go. Come on.
I mean, that may just get your eyes off yourself and pour into somebody else. It's just, we can all do that.
First step towards recovery, right?
That's
Is
why I
serving
got
somebody else.
excited
One of the
about
first
that,
steps.
man. Anybody
Yeah.
can do what you just said, even, and my answer would have been the same as John's, you connect with people, but boy, sometimes it's hard to be transparent. I remember when Promise Keepers were like, you got to get together with a group of guys and spill your stuff every Tuesday morning over coffee. And I'm going, I'm not doing that. And
That
the
sounds
reason,
terrible.
well, the reason I didn't do it is because it was like, if I'm gonna be honest with you, I gotta know you love me. And if I don't know you love me, then I won't trust you. And that's what I love about what you guys are doing. You're proving your love for the church, and you're proving your love for pastors, and especially in the rural setting, because of the things you're doing. And man, I appreciate it so much. Thank y'all for taking the time to be here today. This has just been so wonderful.
Dale, thank you. I
Thanks,
mean, I
Dale.
love what you're doing, and I appreciate how authentically you speak about your journey, and just any way we continue to encourage you and/or the pastors that you're working with, please let us know.
I'll do so. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. Shalom. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.